Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and this evening's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our guest both this week and next week is Dr. John Valusik. He is a clinical psychologist from Wichita, Kansas, and has been visiting our areas dealing with some important issues for our medical society, and also has visited in the past concerning education in this area. He is also the author of 3 booklets entitled Some Ways of Thinking About Human Behavior, a second one entitled Jottings, and third is People Are Not for Hitting. He is a national lecturer dealing with human relations and healthy self-awareness. It is our purpose in these 2 weeks to especially emphasize such issues as corporal punishment in the home and in the school, capital punishment, and violence in human relations. Also on show number 2, we'd like to deal specifically with self-awareness for persons in our society and knowing more about how one fits into the society. Dr. Valusik, it's very much a pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Joining with me in questioning our guests for these 2 weeks are our panel. First of all is Mary Lou Reed, a regular member of the panel, holding a baccalaureate from Mills College in California, did her graduate work in religion at Columbia University. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you, Tony.
It's a pleasure to welcome our program for the first time as a visiting panel member, Myrna Ternosky, who holds a BA in music education and currently is the president of the Kootenai-Benewall County Medical Auxiliary. Welcome to our program. And our third regular panelist is Janelle Burke, holding a baccalaureate degree from the College of Idaho and a master's from Indiana University. Welcome once again, Janelle.
Thank you, Tony.
We'll proceed to questions at once, and the first series will come from Mary Lou Reed.
Dr. Valusik, you have 2 very radical ideas that you have put together. The first one is that people are not for hitting, and the second is that children are people too. And you have taken this on as a cause. When did you first really decide that this should become a major crusade for you?
As far as it being a major crusade for me, probably that started a little over 10 years ago. More than 15 years ago, I began looking for another explanation about why human beings appear to be so violence-prone, and why in America and elsewhere we seem to see so many kinds of behaviors between human beings who should be, I think, capable of being warm, loving, cooperative individuals, and yet we're seeing so many evidences of violence. So I was trying to discover another way of thinking about violence. And in the process of doing that, I kind of, over a period of years, sort of, I guess you'd say, stumbled upon a thought that was so close at hand that it seemed to me to be too simplistic to have any validity. But as I began checking out that thought, I decided that it shed a great deal of light on why human beings are violence-prone. And so once I decided, by looking at other people's research and by using my own thoughts and observing patients and people around me, I decided that there was another explanation for human violence besides the ones that I had normally been exposed to. Our society has kind of taught us that man is innately evil. Theologically, we've been told that we are innately destructive, that it's supposed to be the nature of the beast, that we carry primitive, aggressive, violent urges within us. I tend to discount most of those. In essence, what I believe is that violence is essentially learned. Once you decide it's essentially learned, then you ask the question, how is it learned, or where is it learned? And as I began pursuing that question, I gravitated more and more to the early years of life, and pretty soon I was back at the home, and I came up with what appears to sound like a very super simplified statement, which is violence is essentially taught at mothers and dads' knees. It's reinforced by the schools, who permit and encourage the use of corporal punishment, and the churches also lend credibility to the idea that in our society we believe in the hitting of children. So, in essence, my campaign says people are not for hitting children, or people too. If you want to do something about reducing violence, we need to take a look at this spanking practice at home and throughout our society.
Well, why do you think in the United States we tend to teach this violence more than they do in perhaps European countries, for example?
Well, they do it also in the European countries, Western civilization. In fact, I make the claim that throughout most of human history, this one key factor may have been grossly overlooked by almost everyone because it's so close to all of us. Throughout all society, as far as I know, through societies throughout human history, almost all societies, with rare exceptions, have always made use of one common practice, and that is the use of physical pain against children as a basic child rearing technique. Now, so they're doing the same thing in Europe as part of what I'm saying. Because America came together as an amalgamation of a variety of different kinds of streams of life, maybe that added a special kind of a problem for us. But we see in America, and of course I'm most familiar with what's happening in America, so I speak about our society more often than others. I'm just simply saying in America, although we espouse the virtues of love and respect for children, and we talk about human beings being created a little lower than the angels, and that the future rests in the hands of these, our offspring, America as a nation believes in the hitting of children. We believe, we encourage, we praise, we say that that's what children need, and good parents must do that, and you do it in the name of love. So there's another dimension here. We distort the concept of love also, is what I'm saying. So with homeschool and church, teaching, preaching, and upholding the value of hitting children, to me it is no surprise at all that some people in our society are going to hit too hard, that some people are going to become abusive, that some people are going to resort to very severe forms of physical violence, severe forms of hitting. So I have an option of cutting through that. I simply say, given that most forms of violence make use of some form of hitting, once you understand that that is so, most forms of violence make use of some form of hitting, what if we could eliminate all forms of hitting? All you have to do is decide that people are not for hitting, include children in your definition of people, work to eliminate hitting for any purpose, anywhere, at any time. There ought to be, dramatically, on a common sense basis, a rather significant reduction in violence, if we can bring that to pass. Why can't we bring it to pass? Because in 85% of the homes in America, mothers and dads believe that you're supposed to spank, spat, pinch, tunk. We're supposed to hit children for good purposes. We don't call it hitting, though. We call it spanking. And in school, we don't call it hit it. We call it necessary corporal punishment as a last resort for gross misbehavior. And the church says spare the rod and spoil the child. And the courts say it's okay for parents to hit children. It's okay for the schools to hit children. And I'm saying we, in effect, are teaching how to become hitters by hitting.
And you really have yourself a crusade when you're talking about coming up against the homeschool and church.
Sure, because I'm as appalled as anybody else in the nation is about the increased prominence given to child abuse in our society. I'm extremely frustrated by school violence and vandalism. I'm frustrated by the increase in violent crime. I'm frustrated by wives being battered and spouse battering. I'm frustrated by the fact that the criminal element, the violent criminal element in our society doesn't seem accessible to those of us who deem ourselves to be non-criminal. And I want to do something about it. And what I'm saying is the basic reason are millions of dollars that we spend in research, probably hundreds of millions now if we back up over the years, why we haven't made a dent in violence is because we're looking in the wrong direction. We want to do something about those violent people out there who perhaps are hereditarily constructed that way. And we want to do something about television violence. Television, we were violent before television ever came into existence, but that seems to be overlooked. Television may act as a reinforcer, as part of my argument. It may act as a reinforcer. I'm not nearly as concerned about television violence as I am about what's happening in front of the screen in the living rooms in America. We've got some national researchers now who are specializing in family violence. Some national researchers who are coming up with some astounding statistics. And I'll just quote a couple of quick things from them. This is Murray Strauss and Gelles and Steinmetz are the three people who have been achieving increasing prominence because of the nature of their studies in the last couple of years. They've testified before Congress on a number of occasions just within the last year and a half. What they're saying, and you don't have to believe their conclusions, is, but they say, aside from wars and riots, where police are involved, prison riot type thing, aside from wars and riots, the home in America is the most violent institution in America. That's what they're saying. I agree with them. They're supporting the same concept that I've been talking about for 10, 15 years. We've got studies of juvenile delinquents that get involved in the same thing, that repeat over and over again. You want to raise a delinquent? We can almost specify the criteria for raising a delinquent. Neglect them, don't show them very much love, and beat the hell out of them. And I can almost guarantee that we'll have a delinquent. Violent criminals in society have all been abused, almost invariably, all been abused. Well, I can go on and on with that sort of thing, but yes, it is a crusade.
And I have to share you.
Okay.
Continuing along these lines of living in a violent world, I would like to know your opinions on the violence that we promote through football and hockey and such contact sports.
The sports scene, this is a question that comes up very frequently as I travel across the nation. One, how do I feel about sports and what's the impact of sports? I think this can be looked at in several different ways. I guess my first response to your question would be to say that I think the violence that we see in professional sports particularly Hockey is perhaps the outstanding example in my mind, which I no longer even call a sport. Professional hockey, I think it was a sport at one time. It is now something else. I don't know what. I don't know what the Romans used to call it when they threw the Christians to the lions. I guess they called that a sport too, didn't they? I think that's what hockey is. I think professional football is very close to becoming the same sort of sport, non-sport. And I think these kinds of things where, although the rules have been stretched now and bent, originally, the intention was that these games were played by, let me say this on behalf of, let's say, professional football, that the people who go into professional football, the players, are well trained in the basics. Physically, they're in great shape. They go voluntarily. They go willingly. The intent, supposedly, of the game is really not to kill the opponents. It's to move the ball a certain distance. But you play aggressively, you play with force, and therefore, yes, there will be some bruises that occur. They do play on an open field in front of other human beings. They do play with people running around blowing whistles when they violate the rules. There are penalties imposed. So I can at least say that on behalf. There are rules, but those rules are being stretched. And I think for young people in college who are being taught nowadays by many coaches across America, one of the things I learned when I was in high school, playing football in high school, we had a coach back in those days, back in the 1940s. There really were human beings then who really did say, it's not whether you win or lose that counts, but how you play the game. That's a quaint old idea. Honest to God, there are really people who used to say that. And that was a neat thing, to know that you could play hard, play fair, and if you lost, well, it was no great tragedy. Nowadays, of course, that's all turned around. Winning is all important. So that concept of winning is all important, winning by any means, gouge, hit, bite, scratch, bruise, break bones, terribly destructive as a reinforcing element for violence in our society, I think. Sports need to be cleaned up.
Thank you.
Janelle Bird.
Continuing on with the family situation, can you tell us what kind of correlation there is between the family where interpersonal relationships result in violence and child abuse? In other words, where the wife is beaten, the child is beaten, there's a lot of yelling, that kind of thing.
Okay.
There's a lot of correlation between those kinds of things, as I understand. Would you agree that there's
correlation between wife battering and child abuse?
Right.
Oh, yes. Okay, I wasn't sure what you were correlating with what. Yes, there is an increased likelihood that if you're in a family pattern where, by the way, in anticipation of another kind of thing, and let me just point out that this concept of wife battering, which an awful lot of people seem to think is a relatively small or minor phenomenon and no big deal and you ought not to make too much of concern over it, in a study of 1972 that was done, a national survey, 1 out of 4, 25% of all males, married males in this survey, thought that there were occasions when it would be appropriate at least once a year to slap their wives' faces for some purpose, to express some kind of frustration or solve an argument. 1 out of 6 women in the same survey felt it was appropriate to be hit by their husbands. So the attitude of saying it's okay on certain occasions to strike somebody is not at all a rare phenomenon in our society, and it isn't limited just to abusive individuals or people who are overtly violent in a way that frightens most of us. Yeah, we know that if husbands and wives tend to settle differences by resorting to physical blows, along with the harsh yelling and the verbal criticisms, little children are there observing, picking that up. And some of that same attention is turned to the children then, the same kinds of frustrations. Very young children tend to be hit more often in a bruising way, in an abusing way by women. And some people think that that's sort of strange because women don't seem to be essentially violent. Well, it isn't really that surprising because women still have the primary responsibility for taking care of very young children at home. And if they're doing it alone or in a situation of extreme stress, they take their frustrations out on the kids. And our society says it's okay.
What triggers that situation? In some cases, a man may be violent with one woman, but not necessarily with another, as I understand it. What triggers this particular kind of interpersonal relationship that results in violence?
Well, there are many things. It's a very complex psychological thing, but in essence, there are certain ego involvements, is what I would say. Anything that can attack my ego that I think is in danger of being put down, the concept of being put down, or if I feel weak or if I feel threatened. I've been conditioned to respond to certain kinds of emotional stimuli. We all have. Some individuals have a very short fuse. They can't stand much in the way of frustration. Certain individuals tend to rub them the wrong way, probably because if it's a man, it reminds me of mother or something like that in my past, and I don't even know what it is. And so I'm more likely to lash out at one kind of a woman than another, particularly a dominating woman, a woman who's attempting to dominate or seems to be a bit abrasive, more likely to strike out at this person because they're a threat to the male ego. That's a super simplified answer. There are a lot of complex things about why one person responds to another who is, how one can evoke an anger response and another person doesn't seem to do the same thing to you, saying the same kinds of words.
How serious do you feel that loud and abusive talk is? Is it less serious than hitting, or is it the same kind of effect, basically?
Oh, I think it can be.
Emotionally.
I think you can. I think you can express a lot of loud vexation and express personal anger if you don't direct it at a child, and the child knows that you're expressing. As Chaim Gunat used to say some years ago, if you know, when you want to let the child know that he's really having an impact on you and you're really frustrated. I'm very frustrated. I'm very angry. That, you know, it really discombobulates me. It's a way of letting the kid know that, you know, you're really distressed, but you're not calling him names and you're not directing the attack specifically on him. So there's a way of distinguishing, I think, the what might be called verbal abuse. But I'm equally concerned about verbal abuse or psychological abuse as I am with physical abuse. And when I talk about people are not for hitting, I really am talking about we ought to be moving in a direction, call it an idealistic direction, but I'm saying we as a nation ought to be cultivating an idea, an attitude, an orientation, a new value. I refer to this as a new ethic, a new standard, a new national good. We ought to be cultivating a new attitude that says people are too important to be hit or hurt in any way, and we need to be learning more about how often are we hitting verbally and how often are we hitting psychologically. Maybe we could even take this into the realm of socioeconomically. How are we hitting people on an individual basis in groups? But you see, those are, I feel I can't take on the whole society. I got enough here with concentrating on the physical. What I'm saying is if we can't even get people to abandon physical hitting, if college-educated school teachers, school administrators, and school board members, by and large, cannot agree, and state legislators, that we ought to back off on hitting children in school with boards. All 50 states in the United States have laws against child abuse. If you saw a man hitting a 7-year-old child on the street corner across from your house with a board, you might suspect this is a potential case of child abuse, and you might wonder, should you report it or not? If you saw it on a second occasion and you wanted to do your duty as a citizen, you might say, gee, that guy's hitting that 7-year-old kid with a board. You might report him to the social service agency, protective agency, or somebody as a suspected case of child abuse. If the same child is being hit in the school by a board called a paddle, it's perfectly okay. Parents applaud, teachers applaud, school board applaud, legislature applaud, and the church says, thank you, by God, that's what we need to do. This is what these kids need. I'm saying it's ridiculous and nonsense. But that's what we've learned to do. You know, I blame nobody for that. That's the way we are. Until we were able to send a ship to the moon, until we actually walked on the moon, we had never walked on the moon before. What I'm really saying is that this whole nation and all of Western civilization has never really attempted to do away with the hitting of children. That's what I'm trying to bring into national consciousness and awareness. If enough people get concerned about it and begin to realize the potential implications, I'm just simply saying this equation is almost as simple as the equation that Einstein put forth. E equals mc squared. Very simply stated. People are not for hitting. Very simply stated. And it could create a revolutionary potential that's going to influence love relations, all levels of human relations, family relations, criminality in our society, the reduction of violence, and the cultivation of love, and have impact on mental and emotional states. It's really that simple, if we can get enough people tuned into it. We can't reduce violence because in the same hand that we're trying to cut back on child abuse, in the same time we're trying to do something about rape and battered women, and we put shelters up and hotlines, and I'm very active in the child abuse movement. I'm supportive of these things. They're all after-the-fact phenomenons, what they are. At the same time that we're doing that and trying to clean up television violence, as I said at a recent meeting of one of the national PTA groups, while we're trying to clean up television violence, in the home we're encouraging mothers and dads to smack their kids. Don't want you to watch that Kojak. That's a bad, terrible thing. We don't want you to be violent. Stop that. Don't want you to be violent. 4-year-old. We smack the 4-year-old to prevent him from hitting the 2-year-old and teach him he shouldn't hit the little baby brother. And we hit him to teach him not to hit. What I'm saying is, with the best of intentions, we're doing something else.
Dr. Belusic, you know, I'm sure you meet some of your critics as you cross the country, and a number of individuals in this country that are in jurisprudence in particular, and other fields too, say that it is time in America, with the rise in crime over the years, to get tougher, and they're passing mandatory sentences in some states and advocating bringing back the death penalty, capital punishment. How do you respond to your critics that say that the answer to combating crime is to be tougher?
That's a super simplistic, mindless kind of an approach to human relations problems, and one that's been in existence. When you don't know what else to do, hit. I guess my best answer to this would be a 3-year-old girl. This is a true story from a couple of years ago. I'll make it very brief. 3-year-old girl who went to a nursery school where a man who believed in essence what I'm believing was handling this little nursery school. And he was teaching all the little kids, you must never hit. I won't hit you. You mustn't hit one another. Nobody's to hit anybody. That's what he was teaching them. This little 3-year-old girl went home to her father on one occasion, who wasn't really aware of everything that was going on in the nursery school. And Dad got angry about something, was obviously tromping across the room, going to really get this little 3-year-old. Just before he reached her, she turned up and looked at him with her little innocent eyes and said, Daddy, it doesn't take a brain to cause pain. And to me, that's the essence of exactly, it doesn't take a brain to cause pain. It doesn't take a brain to execute somebody. It doesn't take a brain to get tough and smash with. It doesn't take a brain. It takes a brain to figure out how do you and I, with differences of opinion, work these out amicably. How do we achieve consensus? How do we try to reach some kind of mutual agreement using our rational thought processes? That takes a brain. That takes planning. That takes patience. That takes a concept of mutual respect. I have to develop some kind of consistent attitude of viewing you as a worthwhile human being. So, I understand the frustration of the critics. As the violence levels seem to increase, that's how we've always solved problems. When you don't like what people are doing, go to war against them. When you don't like what the people are, burn them at the stake. So we appeal to these simplistic methods, and I'm just saying they don't work.
Do you think there are individuals in the society, for whatever the reasons may be, have reached the point of hardness until, and are so violent that they cannot be dealt with in what one would call a rational way? I'm thinking of a Manson, for example, in California. How does one deal with an individual as that, after they reach a certain point in society?
Okay, let's talk about two different things here. Let's take a Manson who is a threat, who is a serious threat to not only the people that he's already injured and to their families, but he, representative of a symbol, is a threat to anybody in America or any other person like Manson. When you run across a Manson, I'm not saying forgive him and love him and embrace him and say it's okay. I'm not talking about that at all. This guy is a threat to our society, and in this society we have to do something about threats. But if we can't figure out some way to catch him before he does all these terrible things, and we have to catch him after the fact, there will always be a place, I think, in our society for prisons of some sort, or something like that, some sort of penal institution. So yes, you have to put this guy away. Now you may say, well, but wouldn't it be better to execute him? I find that very interesting. You could guarantee that this person would never kill again. But if you begin looking at some statistics in our society, as I've done, of the executions that occurred since 1930 in the United States of America, 183,000 roughly murders occurred, 1,200 executions. These are murder, 183,000 homicides, individuals who had killed, who were found guilty of killing. And we only executed, during all the years when we had capital punishment in almost all the states, we only executed a total of 1,200 people. Now my question is, what it came down to over a period of many years was about 2 people, 1.5 to 2 people out of every 100 murderers was being executed by the state. What I want to know is, what did we do with the other 98? How come we somehow can figure we can handle these 98 murders, but these 2, we really got to get rid of these 2 to somehow protect the nation. And then, it has never stemmed the tide of killings. So it's, again, a tough problem, and I'm being very brusque about it. I'm saying capital punishment is not the answer. The mentality that upholds capital punishment is the same mentality that believes it's okay to hit for good purposes. If our purposes are good, if our purposes are worthy, we can engage in holy wars. We can call it jihad, as they say in Iran. We're going to engage in a holy war, because if it's a holy war, it's okay to kill and maim and mutilate, as long as you're doing it for good purposes. See, I don't buy that argument. I say, if we really are loving and caring and humanitarian-oriented, we ought to be trying to go beyond the most primitive caveman mentality. That's what we ought to be trying to do. Whether we succeed or not is another matter. I opt for at least making effort. And a very simple way of starting is to say, hey, couldn't we learn to respect people, including little children whom we love, respect them to the point of saying our hands are not designed for hitting or hurting. Our hands are designed for helping, caring, and healing. And you should never strike a human being for any reason, even to protect him from running out in the street.
Lou Reed.
Well, Dr. Valusic, to go along with that, I'm sure that I have to ask the obvious, which has to do with discipline. If you're against spanking, what do you do? How do you train the small child who may be below this level of reason, who may be 1.5 to 3? How can you actually protect them from running out in the street, from getting burned, from drowning, from these emergencies that parents frequently will spank for?
Sure, those are legitimate concerns, legitimate questions, and let me approach it in a rapid way by saying, first off, I'm concerned about how we use the word discipline. Most people use the word discipline interchangeably with punishment. I see discipline as something that one learns and develops, and it becomes self-discipline, motivated from within. I think of the discipline of an orchestra. Anyway, discipline is essentially taught, and we guide and mold a person into discipline. I don't see it as a form of punishment. I'm not opposed to children learning to be disciplined. I'm not even opposed to mothers and fathers setting, in fact, I insist that they set limits. Children need limits. They need to know that this is approved and this is not approved, and you cannot go beyond here. Some undesirable consequence, some unpleasant consequence is going to happen, and I'm going to firmly stand right here and insist on it. Children need limits. They don't need to be hit. Now, when you say, then what does one, see, one of the real frustrating things is what does one put into place of spanking? In effect, that's another problem. That's the opposite side of the coin. the concept of how one learns to become a teacher, you graduate from high school first and then you go 4 years to college. How long does it take to learn to become a teacher? How long does it take to learn to become a physician? How long does it take to learn to become a parent? How long does it take to learn positive human relations so that you learn to relate more effectively? That's what's involved in what do you put in place of spanking.
And it's all on-the-job training,
right,
too.
Non-spanking and new learnings, that's what takes place. But you see, again, we have been conditioned as parents, I as a part of the whole process, I don't blame anyone for this, this is the way our society has been. I'm just saying we can take another step now toward a more humane future. It poses a real problem. A mother or a father that's been accustomed to using an authoritarian, painful procedure for good purposes, I'm not talking about brutality now, but the occasional slap that anybody with children probably has done, who believes that that's necessary, who thinks it's a way of teaching right from wrong, who believes in the punishment mode, when they ask, but what do I put in place of spanking, it's very difficult for me to answer because they're looking for some simple thing that's quick and efficient, like hitting.
Some way to get the child's attention.
Yeah, hitting hurts. You can use pain to suppress behavior, no doubt about it. You can create fear states, no doubt about it. But let me take your running out in the street thing. I like to always point this out. If you really wanted, and this will sound stupid, but you know, if you really wanted to, how do you protect the child from running out in the street so he doesn't get run over by a car?
Build a fence.
Or build a fence. Don't let the kid, if the kid's too young to be out on the street, don't let him out. Put a dog collar around his neck, keep him in the front yard. See, those are dumb things. Or just don't, well, but you can't always watch, then don't let him run around. I saw a little 3-year-old girl in a high-rise building getting ready to climb up off the railing, across an apartment building across from where I was staying just recently. And I was getting ready to yell because I couldn't see any adults around anywhere. This little girl, had she made it, would have fallen to her death, undoubtedly. And my concern was, you know, if the mother then came out and spanked the child and said, you shouldn't be climbing up there, and felt she had to discipline and punish her, my question is, how come the little kid was out there climbing up on this thing in the first place? Where was mom in the first place? Here's a quick question for you in terms of spanking for anybody that spanks their children to protect them from harm out in the street, okay? Don't want them to run out. The way the thing is put to me on many talk shows around the country when I get involved in radio call-in kinds of things, it's like, well, doctor, isn't it better to spank your child and cause a little pain than to have her run out in the street and get run over by a truck? I've never failed to agree. If those are the only two alternatives you have, either spank and cause a little pain or the kid's going to get killed by a truck, by all means spank. I'll even come help you. But then I say, if those are your reasons for spanking, you need to ask yourself another question. How often are trucks running through your bathroom, basement, living room, backseat of the car, supermarket, because you're spanking all over there?
I must interrupt. We're out of time. I want to express our appreciation to you. And ladies and gentlemen, our guest, Dr. John Valusic, will be with us again next week for part 2. In that show, we're especially going to emphasize the individual and self-awareness and what that can do to what he believes corrects certain things in our society. I hope you'll be with us that time. I am Tony Stewart. Have a good week.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we would like to continue our discussions with Dr. John Valusic, who was with us last week, concerning some very important issues concerning violence in our society and also the question of corporal punishment, and particularly this week to deal with self-awareness for an individual in their relationship to others in the society. As to background, Dr. Valusic is a clinical psychologist from Wichita, Kansas, holding a PhD in that field from the University of Michigan. He is also the author of 3 booklets, the first one entitled Some Ways of Thinking About Human Behavior, a second one entitled Jottings, and the third publication, People Are Not for Hitting. He is a national lecturer that tours the country speaking on human relations and healthy self-awareness. He has been to our city twice in the past few years, once on behalf of our school system, and most recently with the Kootenai and Benewall County Medical Auxiliary Services. Welcome once again to our program.
Thank you. Glad to be here again.
I'm happy to welcome back our same three panel members from last week to participate in the questioning of our guests. First of all is Mary Lou Reed, holding a baccalaureate degree from Mills College in California and her graduate work in theology at Columbia University. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you again, Tony.
Also, Myrna Tarnowski, who holds a BA degree in music education and is currently the president of the Kootenai-Benewall County Medical Auxiliary. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
And our third panelist and a regular member of the panel, Janelle Burke, holding degrees from the College of Idaho and Indiana University. Welcome, Janelle.
Thank you, Tony.
Before we turn to the panel for questionings, I would like to ask Dr. Belusky about a resolution that he has with him entitled "To Support the Creation of a New National Ethic to Reduce Human Violence," and I believe this is something that you have prepared and you're promoting in the country this time. Would you give us the purpose of it and some of the content that one finds in the resolution?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. This goes back about 10 years. The groundwork for this resolution was laid some 10 years ago. In essence, it comes down to the words that I've used most frequently, and they're expressed on my bumper sticker: people are not for hitting, and children are people too. What I did at the request of the Texas Association for Mental Health about 3.5 or 4 years ago, they asked if I would write a resolution based on these words, calling for the establishment of a new national ethic, a new national value, if you will, and try to bring this into public awareness. It's something that I've been doing, and the Texas Association for Mental Health decided it would help if they could get a formal resolution at their mental health association. So I wrote the resolution specifically for them. We didn't get it submitted in time to go through the appropriate procedure there, but the resolution was picked up by other mental health associations, and in June of 1978, the first national organization, which is called the Mental Health Association Staff Council, at their national meeting in Mobile, Alabama, approved and adopted overwhelmingly this resolution, which calls for establishing a new national value based on the words "people are not for hitting." In essence, what that means is, if we can't agree on what people are for, couldn't we at a minimum agree what people are not for? People are not to be hit, people are not to be hurt for any reason, in any way, by anyone. And children are also people. In effect, what this is then is an effort to get anybody and everybody in America aware of what I'm calling a new invention, you might say, inventing a new idea. Hey, America, what if on January 1st, 1980, we all agreed to stop hitting people? And if everybody agreed to stop hitting, isn't it possible that we could cut back on violence? And if you think of it that way, the general answer is yes, of course it is. And what I'm saying is that in order to achieve that, we also have to take a very close look at our parenting practices, our disciplinary practices, our punishment practices at home with children in the care of loving parents who spank their children. The whole society has taught us it's okay to spank. I maintain that the home, the school, and the church, these three basic institutions, are primarily responsible, unintentionally, for laying the foundations for teaching people how to become hitters, which is an essential step in learning how to make use of violence. I want to undercut that. That's what the resolution is for. It's available to any organization anywhere that's interested in adopting it and making a personal commitment or an organizational commitment to disseminate information about the need to do away with all forms of hitting in our society. That's what it comes down to.
Lou Reed.
Dr. Velusik, you have done a lot in the field of self-creation and self-awareness, and I have a statement that you've made that I'd like to read and ask you to expand upon it. You have said that we ourselves are the architects of our future selves. Would you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. And what I really mean in simplest fashion is that as of today, as I'm getting through the day-to-day, from the time I wake up this morning until the time I go to bed, I will make certain decisions. I will feel certain ways, react certain ways, think certain thoughts, and do certain things. If I don't happen to like the kind of human being I am today, when I first get up in the morning, if I don't happen to like that kind of human being, the question I need to ask myself is, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do today that can help me be a somewhat different human being tomorrow, which has not yet come? So, in essence, what the statement means is, we ourselves are responsible for the choices we now make as adults. I can think of nobody else who's responsible for John Velusik, my feelings, my thoughts, my attitudes, my behavior, except myself. Therefore, I'm responsible for myself, I'm responsible for my choices. If life isn't going quite the way I like it now, it behooves me to become aware of how am I now, intentionally or unintentionally, interfering with my own future self, the kind of self I'm going to try to be tomorrow or next week or next year.
And what you're trying to counter, as I understand it, is that we have a tendency to let ourselves be defined by other people, and so that we will let other people's views impose themselves upon us and take those for truth instead of defining ourselves. Is
Right,
that
very much
correct?
so. We tend to let other people determine who we are and how we feel and what we ought to do and how we should think. And our past lives also, we tend to let our past lives do the same thing for us. Most of us, in spite of our education, sophistication, intelligence, and well-meaningness, still carry with us a lot of what I call non-helpful emotional learnings from our childhoods. And some of those are that they're so strong that they tend to interfere with our own freedom of choice today. We tend to believe that if we had unfortunate pasts, we're stuck. That's the way I was, that's the way I am, that's the way I always will be. Well, you see, I was brought up in such and such a family. My mother did this, my dad did that, my brother did this, my sister did that, the neighbor did this. Therefore, I'm stuck. I can't, I am this way and this way I'm always going to be. Nonsense. But if you talk to yourself that way, probably that's what will happen. When you get to be an adult, you have to begin to assume more responsibility for yourself. You can't change the past, but you have a lot of options about what kind of a future past you're going to have, because you are the one that's actually going to help create your future past.
And you can't blame anybody else.
I don't see any point in blaming anybody for anything, and nor do I see any point for people blaming themselves for anything they've done either. Blame is not a very helpful kind of a mood or attitude or condition to get caught up with.
Myrna.
The concept that you have also advocated, called the bucket and dipper concept, I think is a one that's very easy to understand and perhaps would be shared with your audience.
Okay, it takes a little while to explain it, but I'll just try to give a very brief summation of it. In essence, what it does is it says ask anybody to conceive of ourselves as if we are a bucket, or as if we carry a bucket around with us. And depending, or like this glass, we're talking about a bucket. Depending upon how much is in our bucket or how little is in our bucket of whatever the substance is, that will determine how we feel at any given time, and to a large extent how we behave or how we act. If our buckets are full, that's when we feel good, we're enthusiastic, we're energetic, we're full of life, we're pro-life people. We're warm, loving, compassionate, cooperative, nice people to be around. Life is great and we feel good. That's what a full bucket means. An empty bucket, or an almost empty bucket, means all of the opposite of this. An empty bucket means we feel rude, negative, hostile, we're not pleasant to be around, we're running other people down, we're making life miserable for them and for ourselves. It's what I call an anti-life attitude. Our bucket levels kind of vary on a day-to-day basis, and all of us at times have kind of low bucket levels. That's when we feel rude, negative, and hostile. If you once get this image of that the bucket level is what determines why a person does what he does, or why she does what she does, all you have to do is observe someone else's behavior. If you see a lot of hostility and negativity and rebelliousness and these sorts of things coming out of this individual being directed toward you or someone else, you can rest assured this person has a low bucket level and doesn't feel good about himself. Therefore, you don't have to get hostile and defensive because of his attacks on you, verbal attacks or whatever. You understand his attacks have more to do with himself than with you. That's in essence what this idea is about. It also suggests that, for instance, in dealing with children, when children are rude, negative, and hostile and hard to get along with and just being obstreperous, instead of immediately allowing our egos to be challenged and getting frustrated and attacking back from a position of power and adult authority, perhaps we would understand the reason the child is this way is because his bucket is relatively empty. If I can put enough drops in his bucket and his bucket level gets full, the theory says full bucket means warm, loving, cooperative, pleasant. So we don't need to be punishing children you don't punish children into filling bucket levels. What you do is by providing positive support for them, acknowledging their worth, communicating to them that you care about them, that they really are important, helping them to achieve certain measures of success. In other words, helping them build personal self-esteem, because that's really what the bucket thing is all about. You then can promote human welfare. This concept of the bucket, though, is a very simple one for children to understand and adults, too. When you find yourself being negative over a prolonged period of time, not just a quick, spontaneous anger emission, if you find yourself being really hostile and negative and thinking bad thoughts, or verbally angry with somebody over a long period of time, you can count on the fact that inside you don't feel good about yourself right then and your own bucket level is down. Adults need to provide positive drops for the adults around them too. That's the business of giving positive strokes or letting people know that they're important. It's a simple way of thinking, but it's a useful way, and even children can understand it, that we spend too much time dipping out of people's buckets and cutting them down, and what we really need to do is put drops in a person's bucket.
Chanel Burke.
You have been very interested in education. Could you please share with us the influence that you think teachers have on the lives of their students?
Well, I think this might seem like a cliche type thing to say, but I think next to parents, teachers are the single most important source of influence in terms of providing models, human relations, helping one to develop moral, ethical orientations, helping to learn right and wrong aside from whatever formal academic teaching is going on. Teachers are extremely important as reinforcers for certain kinds of attitudes that may have gotten started in the home, or as developers of attitudes and orientations and beliefs that didn't, unfortunately, get started in the home. Teachers are extremely important. I spend a lot of time in workshops around the nation and working with teachers groups on helping them kind of look at themselves as human beings. My statement about education is that the goal of education in America, I say, although nobody else in America knows that this is the goal, but after I tell them about it, then they know it's the goal. I say the goal of education in America is, or ought to be, to help develop more human beings. The more human beings, that's what the real goal, that's what the whole purpose of reading, writing, arithmetic, social studies, and everything else we're doing in the schools is, to help develop more human beings. Now I have a conception of what I mean by more human being. What I mean by that is essentially those characteristics that we call positive characteristics, humane characteristics. Warm, here we go again with those positive words. I'm talking about helping develop more loving human beings, caring, kind, considerate, compassionate, understanding, cooperative human beings. That's what the goal of education is. A way of putting it into perspective is to say, there's no point in teaching English, reading, writing, arithmetic in order to get a job, in order to make your way in the world, if, as a result of your education, you're going to use your knowledge and your skills for anti-human, prejudicial, run-down, bigoted, destructive kinds of human interactions. What's the point in being educated if we don't know how to get along with one another? What's the point in being educated if we're going to be filled with hate orientations toward individuals and groups around us? We failed if that's the end result of our educational process. So with this as a goal for teachers to look at, then you suddenly become aware that who I am as a human being, who I am, and what kind of a person am I still trying to become is really considerably more important than what do I now know and how well do I know it. Teachers have to know something. There's a certain body, a certain content of information I think they need. There's a certain skill development, a certain methodology, and a certain technique. But beyond that, the main thing that a teacher needs is to be working on his or her own personhood. What kind of a human being am I still trying to become, even if I haven't quite made it yet?
As a parent recipient of a child who is attending a school where there is a great deal of emphasis on positive self-awareness, I can say that it's a very pleasant experience. Would you care to comment on ways that teachers can go about making a student feel positive about themselves?
Well, again, there are many different kinds of approaches that can be used, but what it really comes down to, I think, is each teacher has to figure out, according to his or her own philosophical orientation and perspective, and his or her particular relationship with this child in this classroom with these other classmates. Each thing takes on a slightly different orientation depending upon the circumstances in which it's occurring. But there is a basic characteristic that I think all teachers need to be aware of, reminded of, and work on. If you're going to try to promote positive self-awareness, if you're going to try to promote positive feelings or help promote them in another human being, you can't really do that very effectively with a stranger. So we somehow first have to establish some kind of a personal relationship. In psychology, we call it rapport. All we're really talking about is some kind of a warm, personal relationship, which comes out of, I get to know you and you know something about me as a human being, as a person, aside from my role. One of our problems in America is we're too role conscious. Roles are important and they serve useful purposes. But one of the difficulties is that we learn to communicate role to role, and oftentimes we aren't even willing to try to step out of the roles and try to communicate person to person. So I see like two kinds of things. Establishing that warm personal relationship, meaning I get to know something about you, I relax a little bit, I step out of my role a little bit, I let you know something about me, the human side of me, you know, aside from the professional side. And the other thing is I try to approach you always with a prior condition. The prior condition is no matter what you're doing, good or bad, or doing nothing at all, how do I approach you, relate to you, talk to you with a basic attitude of respect guiding me? Respect is my key word. How do I approach you with respect as a worthwhile, unique human being? If I have that attitude, I'm more likely to help you feel good about yourself than to run yourself down, because I will reduce the inadvertent put-downs that I'm likely to get involved in. If I get so hung up with correcting you and attacking you and challenging you and being moralistic with you, that tends to put you down. There are many sources for failure in our society, and there are many ways in which an individual all by himself can learn to feel bad. We need tremendous amount of support, certainly from the adult world around us when we're children, for letting us know that we really are okay, we are worthwhile, and we are separate from our acts. I have to say this, I believe that human beings are responsible for whatever we do, and that children need to learn to be responsible for whatever they do, and that children need to learn to live with the consequences of whatever accrues from their choices, but that children don't need to be blamed for what they did, nor do parents or adults need to be blamed for what they do, because blame invites punishment. Blame invites too much excessive guilt. That's corroding and that's dehumanizing. A little bit of guilt is good. It juices you up and says, hey, get back on the right track. But too much guilt is debilitating.
Dr. Valusic, I know in your book, the one entitled Some Ways of Thinking About Human Behavior, that you indicate that most people, well, I suppose all people in society, wear a mask, and that makes it difficult for you to understand and communicate with them. That can cause part of our problems. I suppose I have a two-pronged question. First of all, why do people wear a mask in society? What are some of the things going on that cause that to happen? And secondly, what kind of recommendations would you have for people to be more free-thinking or to be more themselves?
Well, you've asked a couple of questions I ought to be able to answer in about 15 seconds or less. The business of masks, there are probably a lot of reasons why we wear masks. I suppose if you got down to a real deep psychological level, the mask idea, the hiding idea, the protective idea, the fake idea, coming from the old Greek theater, the idea of wearing masks, probably where that really came from at some deep psychological level was the necessity for retaining an element of privacy. Maybe originally it started. This is my private self here, and I don't want to share my private self with all those around. I think in the modern world our masks are just simply taught to us. We are afraid to share the internal things because if our thoughts and feelings aren't right, aren't, quote, proper, aren't, quote, the thing to think, then we don't want to take the chance of letting people get to know us.
Do we see that in children, that they are very honest, and that with their honesty they are punished for that oftentimes, and that's when they start developing the mask?
Sure. We started a process years ago. I used to talk about adulterizing our children. Adulterizing in the sense of imposing adult standards on them when they were children. We wouldn't let our children be children when they were children, and then we wondered why they acted so childish when they got to be young adults. That's one concept of adulterizing. Another is just simply spoiling our children. We teach them through a concept I call emotional dishonesty. Emotional dishonesty. We don't want them to tell us what they really feel. If what they really feel happens to be the kid picked on him, made him cry, and you say, what do you think you ought to do? I'm going to go back and smash him on the head with a rock and dump his brains on the ground and grind it in the dirt. You don't want to hear that. What mother or dad wants to hear that? So we say, oh, honey, don't talk that way. Terrible, terrible. See, there are certain things you don't talk about, and we start very early teaching them there's a proper thought, a proper feeling, a proper attitude. So very quickly we learn to start hiding. And that's way back. Don't be emotionally honest. Don't honestly look at Grandma and say, Grandma, you look ugly with those warts on your nose, but I love you. You know, it's terrible. Don't talk to Grandma that way, see? So we learn to lie, the little white lies, and then we get accustomed to them. And then we have to play our roles. Do you know that one of the most frequent complaints I had from patients over the years has been, if anybody ever really got to know the real me, they wouldn't like me? Think about that for a minute. If anybody ever really got to know the real me, they wouldn't like me. If they wouldn't like the real me, then do they like me at all? Who do they like then? They're liking, obviously, a fake me that isn't really me. What good is that?
On the second part of the question, what would you recommend to people to feel more free in their associations, to express their viewpoints? Or maybe I put it this way, too, if they did, would that cause more violence? In other words, would you offend people to the point that they might hit you?
Well, I think initially you could offend people to the point where they might hit you, but I think if you open up, you know, to express oneself, that's why the business of, in a sense, it's almost nonsensical, but yet I still support the basic idea underlining the assertiveness movement now. You know, isn't that sad that we have to now have special lessons to teach ourselves that it's okay to express yourself? Say what you really think. It's really okay. You know, we've got to take special classes for that. So I'm in favor of helping people learn to express themselves because we've had it isn't just a socialization process that kind of squelches us. It goes way beyond that. We have been dehumanized and squelched and molded, and basically the basic human elements of warmth and love and honesty and the good qualities that we could develop and could express more openly, we get shunted away. We don't get a chance to develop those. So there's no simple answer to what should a person do. I think each person has to do what he or she feels comfortable doing, and it depends on where they think they're trying to go in the world, what it is they're trying to do. Attend my lectures. That's a good start.
Liberty.
Dr. Valusic, you hold this interesting concept that only the self sustains its own reactions. In other words, we ourselves cause our own emotional reactions. We're, in effect, responsible for our own emotional behavior. What do you mean by that?
It's very simple. It's not an idea new with me at all. What I'm really saying, and I'm now talking mostly on the adult level, what I'm saying is, I referred to this a bit earlier, that when John Valusic feels angry, when John Valusic feels happy, when John Valusic feels pleased or distressed about anything, I can point to what apparently helped to trigger this distress or this emotional reaction. But in point of fact, the reaction is really coming from my internal processes somehow. I am the one that sees, I'm the one that's making judgments, I'm the one that's responding. If an automatic stimulus occurs that causes my adrenaline to flow, like stepping out in front of a car and almost getting hit, there'll be an automatic built-in physiological response. If a half an hour later that response is still going, my pulse is still pounding, my heart is still going, my throat is dry, my breathing is still like that, the almost getting hit by the car is not even there anymore. That was over with in a matter of seconds. The response has to be coming from my internal mechanisms. Large part of those internal mechanisms are how I think, how I feel, and how I react. So I'm saying, therefore, we ourselves cause ourselves emotionally. Now, very quickly, that's not a new idea with me. Over 2,000 years ago, biblically, we've heard in a variety of ways, as a man thinketh, so is he. As a man thinketh, so is he. And evil proceeds from within. It's not what goes into a man that contaminates him, but what comes out of his heart. And in Shakespeare, the fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars, but within ourselves. And in the arts, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's not what's beautiful out there. It's intrinsically, I'm the one that views it. Same concept. I'm just saying that we've not accustomed to making that a part of ourselves in America to realize I'm responsible for my behavior now. Therefore, I need to learn how to function more effectively so that I don't allow you to determine what kind of a human being I'm going to be.
Well, but how do we learn to interpret these emotional reactions and to actually control them? Because we are assuming that these emotional reactions are triggered and caused from without and that we are not necessarily under control. So how do we get on top of it?
Well, one of the first things is simply to develop an increased awareness. Awareness just simply means to be, in my mind, I'm using it in a very non-technical way, to become a bit more conscious of. That's all I mean by awareness. We have to become aware of certain, call them philosophical premises, if you wish, about the nature of mankind and womankind and humankind. I'm saying that we have a fantastic brain which enables us to do things that no other animal in the animal kingdom that we know of can do. And we are just barely beginning to make use of our own brains. We carry our own brains around with us. Fantastic organ. It can make choices. It doesn't have to be imprisoned like a computer tape. We are the ones who program the tape. We can erase the tape. We can replay the tapes. We can devise new tapes. That's all within our capability. Once you actually understand it's within your capability and you spend time thinking about it and you begin to marvel at what marvelous creatures we really are. See, we don't exalt the virtue of human beings, I think. I don't think we have to worship our brains, but we don't even think about the value of our brains. We don't realize who makes choices for us. We need somebody to help teach us that and reinforce that so that when we get to be adults, we'll recognize, yes, you'll have an impact on me. Yes, I need your support. No, I don't like your criticism because I'm a social being. I'm not denying that these things will have an impact on us, nor am I denying that there are certain biochemical components to our emotions. Of course there are. What I am saying is that we've been programmed, conditioned, trained to overreact emotionally in ways that really we don't have to. If you walk by and call me a name and I stay angry all day long or I choose to fight with you and I say you made me mad, that is not so. You simply set up a stimulus. I have an option about how I'll react to it and how severely I'll react to it. But if I'm not aware of that, you can get to the point where you can convince me that I can't live without you. I love you and you go off with somebody else and I'm going to have to kill myself now. And if I really believe it, I'm going to kill myself. You didn't cause the killing. I did it with my thoughts, my feelings, my beliefs. That's what we ourselves cause ourselves means. And we are responsible for ourselves.
I believe you've already sort of touched on this, but maybe you could elaborate it on just a little bit more by telling us what you mean by plucking your emotional strings.
Yeah, plucking your emotional strings is another way. See, I have these simplistic things. I came out of a lower socioeconomic background. I grew up in the slums in Michigan, and because I grew up in poverty and we were on welfare, I have to have simple concepts that I can understand. So I talk about emotional string plucking as another way of talking about some complex emotional phenomenon. Emotional string plucking is, I've referred to, we become conditioned. Certain kinds of sensitivities, certain kinds of things happen to us in the process of our childhood years that left an emotional impact. Each severe emotional impact or each extremely positive emotional impact left what I call an invisible string, like harp strings, capable of being plucked, capable of vibrating. These are emotional sensitivities. I maintain that all of us had these built within us. Now, if we're not aware that we have these emotional strings and that they're a part of past learnings and past experiences, and they were reinforced by how the adults around us behave, then we are at the mercy of the world around us now. If someone finds one of our sensitivities, if I really can't stand being called stupid or dumb or fatty or knock-kneed or four-eyed or whatever the phrase is that I don't happen to, or swear in my presence or say something that seems offensive to me that I've been conditioned to respond to. If I've got a string for all of these things, anybody, including a stranger, can walk by and say the one word or the one idea, the one thing that I don't like, he plucks my string and he's gone and I'll be upset all day long. What a terrible thing to have happen to a full-fledged, mature adult, that anybody can come along at any time, pluck your string and destroy you emotionally. That's what I'm talking about. Emotional string plucking. But everybody has it done every day. The other thing is you can do it to yourself, driving across town, waiting at a red light. Light doesn't change. A little late for a meeting. Getting hung up by somebody who's a slow driver ahead of you. Railroad crossing, something like that. A little snow slide, whatever it is. And you're muttering to yourself. Nobody's in the car with you. You're muttering to yourself. Pretty soon your lips are gone and your jaws are twisting and you're very angry. And you say, well, the snowslide caused it. Baloney, the snowslide didn't do anything. You were talking to yourself. That's what caused it. You plucked your own emotional string.
Janelle Burt.
Keeping this on a very positive note, what are some symptoms of healthy self-awareness?
Healthy self-awareness, I think, is, and it sounds strange in our society to talk about this, but learning to value yourself as a human being, because I start from another premise. I say you have worth because you're alive. If you start from the premise that to be a human being and to be alive, automatically there's a certain kind of worth to that that's unmodifiable. To recognize that I am unique, there are no one ever existed before like me, and no one will ever again, even an identical twin. We are unique. We need, I think, more positive emphasis about the human character. Instead of the damnation, instead of the condemnation, instead of the kind of things that we're so punitive-oriented and blame-oriented that we're always running people down. We're always finding whose fault is it, instead of uplifting people. Instead of recognizing the value we have as human beings. So, healthy self-awareness, try, with help of a professional if necessary, with the support of church groups, by reading books, whatever, to begin developing some attitudes and orientations that in effect say, I really like the kind of human being I am. I can tell you right here today, John Volusic likes John Volusic. There's more about me that I like than that I dislike. I have certain characteristics and certain behaviors that make life more difficult for me, but I like me.
I'll have to interrupt at that point,
And I'm not going to let you do that.
I'm afraid the clock is the boss. I want to thank you very much. It's been most informative. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Dr. John Volusic, a PhD in psychology from Wichita, Kansas. I want to invite you to be with us again next week at the same time. I am Tony Stewart. Have a good week.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.